hour, we're going to talk about what are the most common risk factors for obesity, how to screen, how to work the person up, and I'm going to talk about the 5 drugs that are approved for obesity management. So in terms of prevalence, it's considered a worldwide epidemic at this point. The CDC reports that more than 1 in 5 adults are obese. Estimation really varies across the country. So you can see the dark red are the highest. Louisiana is the highest. I think I put down 36.2% of adults compared to Colorado, 20%. So there's no state has less than 20%. Diabetes, obesity rates tend to go hand in hand, as do cardiovascular disease as well. So a very common problem that you will run into all the time. Severe obesity, so a BMI of 40 or greater, increased in 1 year, 7%. We are the 6th most obese state in the country. So 1 in 7 adults were considered obese in '95, 1 in 3 in 2010. In diabetes, I told you that at least 40% or more of our population in Oklahoma is at risk for prediabetes. That's a lot. In 2013, 12% of youth were obese, 15% were overweight. So that's 27% of kids above their normal rate range. So really common. So etiology, overweight can start at any age. It can start with gestation. If you are a child that's born to a mother who has type 2 diabetes, your risk is greater. I think you'll see more and more data come out in your professional life about that. Early on, they said if your mom had diabetes, doesn't have any bearing on you, but now there's more evidence that that is probably not the case, and those kids probably are at higher risk for obesity and type 2 as they get older. Mothers who have a higher body mass index or gain a lot of weight during pregnancy, their children are also considered to be at risk. And mothers who smoke during pregnancy. Usually they are small for gestational weight when they're born, but they tend to be more obese as they get older. Breastfeeding tends to be associated with leaner kids as compared to formula-fed children. So a lot of adolescent obesity is established before the age of 5. So what does that say to you? What does that mean to you as providers?
It's the parents, I mean.
Okay, parents, what else?
Pay attention though when they're young.
Pay attention. If you see a chubby, I saw a lot of very heavy children. I saw kids at 5 years of age that were 100 to 120 pounds. I saw when I joined family medicine, we had a brother and sister. They were the 14-year-old, I remember, because he weighed about 350 pounds. And within the year that I saw him, he died. So very, very common. One of the first people I saw as a resident was a young woman. She was probably 28 or 29. She weighed 550 pounds. I may have told you about her. She lived on the 2nd floor of her apartment building. She got so large she could not go up and down the stairs, so she just stayed there. And people brought her food. By the time we saw her, she subsisted mostly on potato chips and soda. Very poor nutrition status. She also died within the year of when I first saw her.
How do you address that toward a parent? Because my family has some family friends that they have morbidly obese children, and they're older now, but I remember when we were younger, I mean, it was clearly evident that they were obese, and the parents just couldn't see it. They were just
Really?
unwilling to see it.
Wow.
So I don't know how you would address that with someone who's like, no, they're just healthy.
And to feed off Zane's, I've heard providers say before that they don't necessarily want to confront the parents because it could give them not bad reviews, but then they lose patience and then they can't manage the kid, and then all of like these other varying factors, but since like meaningful use has been enacted,
Yeah, yeah.
I've seen a lot of pushback from doctors from addressing it too.
Okay, so if the doctors don't address it, who's going to?
We.
Okay, so. Okay, so what do you think? What do you throw things out? I'll tell you what I think, but I want to hear what you think. Yes,
I would say
Lindsay.
after watching in a pediatrician's office, I feel like the doctors can't ignore the fact that the child is in the room too. So many times they would just talk to the parent like the child can't understand anything, and I feel like children do respond better to respect. So as far as understanding that you can teach the child along with the parent about making healthy choices and decreasing juice intake and like different things like that. So just the basics, having that conversation of, you know, we want to prevent obesity. Not saying you are obese, but preventing it. So
Mhm.
starting it at an earlier age.
Okay, Laura? Okay.
Don't you feel like there's some doctors, because you know, some kids may start out kind of chubby, but then they'll hit a growth spurt and they lean out, or you see like these young girls who, you know, oh, they're already counting calories and they're 6 years old, and I think doctors may be afraid of like breeding, you know, like food eating disorders, because you know, you tell a child, oh, you know, you need to lose 10 pounds, and then they take that and run with it the rest of their, so I think maybe doctors are afraid of instilling the negative sides of healthy eating, you know, to young kids that don't really, it really ultimately falls, I think, on the parents more so when they're cooking at home, but that doesn't always happen. There's healthy
I'll
choices
tell you,
out
I
there.
just don't think most people know how to cook or plan a nutrition meal. Now, I'm very biased, that's the group I took care of, but I just never saw it, that people knew. Even the students that pharmacy students, I would come in at lunch and I'm like, okay, we are diabetes, lipids, and here you've got McDonald's everywhere. But you know, they were kids, so they're gonna do what's most expedient. So let me come to Ron.
I was just gonna say that if you can catch it early enough with kids, I think you gotta involve the whole family and have the parents modeling those behaviors. Our pediatrician in Texas, when we had Henry was like, he couldn't even hold his head up yet, and he's saying that, you know, if you don't want him to sit on the couch all day eating potato chips, you need to start doing all this stuff, and any behavior you wanna model, start it now. And I think his intention there was not necessarily that Henry's gonna gain anything from that, but if we can visualize it as parents, then by the time he can model that, he's already seeing that, and so he's just gonna follow in suit. So if he expects to go for a walk every day, or expects to eat healthy choices, or things like that, and that's kind of what's coming about.
So he was telling you early on, here are the good things you can do for your child. Okay, very good. Jordan?
I think there's a lot in like teaching your kids or feeding your kids good, nutritious food, but there's also so much, like especially nowadays, where kids just aren't active. And I think that's the main thing, because I remember when I was a kid, my brothers and I, we would pile food on our plates. We would eat ridiculous amounts of food. But we were outside 3 or 4 hours a day, so it really didn't matter. And I think that's the issue nowadays, is that kids need a lot of food to grow, but we're not getting our kids active. I think is the main issue.
I think that plays a big role, and I'll show you some data here in a minute. Laura, I'll come back to you too.
When I worked in the schools, like we had guidelines that the meals had to follow, but then when you would ask for guidelines on physical activity, like a lot of the schools are cutting recesses, or they only have PE like 2 or 3 times a week. But when I tried to find all the like state data on that, everything is just like recommended for physical activity. So it's like with the food, we would be fined if we didn't follow their guidelines, but with exercise, everything was just highly recommended, but nothing had like a fine associated with it. So a lot of schools are just cutting PE and cutting recess, and it's just recommended, but nothing's done if schools cut it.
Good point, good point.
I just had an interesting observation. So I did like a 3-month internship in family med before I came to school. And probably 4 or 5 times a day, patients would call back and complain because they realized that the doctor put obesity in their chart, and like under general or whatever, because you print out your chart and give it to them. And especially like older or like middle-aged people, they would call back because the doctor put it in their chart, and they were very unhappy that it was not discussed, it was not mentioned, they did not bring it up. So that was just like having a bunch of calls a day. It was just very interesting. Because I would think, oh, well, when I'm younger, I don't go home and like read my chart word for word what the doctor put in my chart, but for some people they were very disturbed that they were not addressed about it in their report.
So think about that when you're, so if they were, so they could have had billing codes associated with that.
Right.
So they've got to have it in there, but not a good idea not to say it to the patient, yeah. Same.
To build off what Ron says, I guess I just don't understand like how you would intervene in a family where they're not role modeling. The parents have lived highly sedentary lifestyles, and there is no role model in the house, and they think that their weight is a normal weight. So the child's going to grow up. I mean, I just think it's cyclical, and I don't understand how you intervene in where they go home and they're going to be fed the same exact foods, they're going to live the same exact like sedentary lifestyle. So.
Okay. Did your parents ever tell you, advise you, recommend, or authoritatively lay down a rule that you did not follow?
Yes.
Okay, and did they repeatedly bring that up to you?
No.
Did it come up on occasions where you would bump up against that rule, that they would say, I told you that this is the way we want things done, and you're not living up to that? In some ways, did they kind of keep bringing it up to your awareness that this was not the way they wanted you to live?
Yes and no.
Okay. Did you at some point have an epiphany, is like, you know, if I keep doing this, this is not going to lead to where I want? Did you have those?
Yes.
Okay, same with patients. It's the same thing. So often people will be in denial, so it's the repetitive bringing things up. I can tell you in dealing with these situations over and over again, it's the relationship you have. The better the relationship you have with those parents, that child, the more they will listen to you. If they trust you, you follow through, you show care and concern, at some point it will start to become more, they'll take that recommendation more. I think you have to keep pointing it out. They bring the kid back. They obviously, now they've got asthma, or they can't run. They want to be in sports, but they can't run across the field. Okay, well that's because they're carrying 20 extra pounds that they shouldn't be. If you want them to do that, then I need you to work on these things. So if you have that relationship, those things will continue to come up. You know, she is, my daughter now is crying and is all upset, don't want to go to school because she can't dress like the other girls. It's those things, because they will come in front of you over and over and over again. So you kind of keep bringing it back up. Here's what we need to do. So that's what I see, is that it's that constant relationship, and in that context, bringing it up. Here's health. I think you have to state health. This is unhealthy for your child to be this way. So they don't hear it the first time, maybe the 15th time, and it starts to hit them in the face, I think they will start to hear. Some will never hear, very sad, people get to choose. But you see that when people don't choose, what's the government start to do? Under our previous administration, what they want to start to do, they want to fine people who are obese, they want to do things to kids in school, they want to make it a child abuse. So you don't want the government to get in it. So you need to get in it because you're in the business of health. Okay, that's why I saw it. That's what I think. I'd love to hear if you think differently.
It's not like the same as weight loss, obviously, but I think the repetition thing is a really big point. Because like I grew up, so flossing is not something that I do on a regular basis, but I do it way more now because over the course of my childhood, like I used to do it more when I was little because I'd like brush my teeth with my parents. My dad always flosses and he'd try to like hammer it in, but then I started doing it by myself and I kind of fell away because it takes a long time and I'm like shoving my hands in my mouth. But I would go in and my gums would always bleed at the dentist and they're like, you need to floss more. And so then I started like flossing 2 weeks before I went to the dentist and it would help. But then I'm like, well, now I don't floss super regularly, but I try to floss like at least a couple times a week, which isn't ideal, but I like set out a little like flossy stick or something, and they just kept saying it every time I would go, like, well, your gums, like I would recommend that you start flossing more. They'll ask me how often I floss, and so they've done that since I was little, and it took forever, but I'm getting better. So I think that it's definitely, if you just keep hammering away at it, and especially if you're seeing someone over and over again, then if you can be really understanding and caring about it, it's still going to be up to them in the end, but it works.
It's just really important to identify it early. So if you see 3- and 4-year-olds that, and I'll show you how you chart that, or how you look this up or use that information, you got to bring it up. Yeah, chubby babies are no longer considered healthy babies. Now they go through spurts. You have to look at it over time. And when kids get into that pre-teen, they will put on weight and then they'll shoot up. But those are norms. We're talking about the abnormal. Address the abnormal. Okay.
I think for me, like the thing, when I was younger, my stepmom cooked dinner every single night, and it was always a homemade meal, and granted, I don't think anybody in the family was overweight or anything like that, but we always had home cooked meals, and now, like, my nieces and nephews, they get McDonald's every night for dinner. Or they're always eating out because it's easier, it's quicker, and sometimes cheaper. Like for me, it's cheaper for me to eat out by myself than it is to cook a meal and waste food. So I think it's like the food industry too, like if they change roles and make things a little bit more healthier and affordable that's healthier, then it would kind of trickle down to the children.
You know, the food industry is always gonna follow what people will buy.
Right.
So you see that with McDonald's, they now offer more healthy. So if the population demands healthy, then they'll provide it. They're in the business of making money. They're not in the business of promoting health. Number one. Allison, did you have something?
No.
Oh. Okay. Anything else on this? Yes, Bing?
I actually think that it has a lot to do with discipline in terms with the parents as well as the children. If the parents themselves aren't disciplined, then they're not going to exhibit those behaviors like Ron said to their children. But even if the parents have poor eating habits, then I think that they still need to take on their role and discipline their children when it comes to food. You know, I think growing up, my mom was very strict. We were never allowed to have like soda or anything like that. But whenever I went to college and I had my own food choices, I would eat out a lot, like Taco Bell and fast food, and I drank a lot of soda. But then I felt the fatigue mentally, so then I reverted back to the way she taught me how to eat. And so I think that sometimes it's just trial and error.
That's a very, very good point. Very good point. When in diabetes, I would always tell the people that I saw, if you are diabetic, you need to tell your children, and most of the people I were dealing with had grown children and probably grandchildren. I told them all, they're all at risk for having diabetes. If you don't want your children to have this, then you need to do things now. So I would drill it in with them. Some of them would bring their kids in with them. So I had one guy he was about 300 pounds, and his 8-year-old daughter, when I started seeing her, was 100 pounds. So I told him, she is already starting. And he angsted over it. He didn't always know what to do. So in working with him, it did trickle down. So I do think if you're in a family medicine practice, I think family conferences would be great. I'll tell you what I saw the Native Americans do when I was with the Harold Hamm diabetes group. What a lot of them did, because the obesity is the highest in the Native American population, what they did is they worked through boys and girls clubs, and they worked through their summer camps. They would have summer camps for kids that are at high risk for diabetes. And what they did is they taught those kids in the girls and boys clubs. They had a year-long curriculum that they called Trails. And in that, over that year, they taught the kids how to eat and cook healthy. And we saw it also in the diabetes camp, is if we taught the kids health, they were nags when they went home. You know, if you teach a kid a rule, they will rule you to death because they'll look at your inconsistencies and they'll point it out. So we found in the Native American, the best thing to do is to go through the kids, because they would drive the parents to do things more healthy. So you might think about that. Are there resources that can teach children that? Are there classes? Can you get a dietitian to put together a class for kids? Any of those would help. Working through the schools, promoting health through the schools. So that's kind of your community involvement. Okay. So, let's see. Oh, let me. Get out of this. So if you look at the genders, women tend to be usually more obese than men. We have a higher fat content, so we tend to fall in those categories more often. If you look at this, it shows you, now this is looking at Latinos versus Caucasians. but it's showing you with children, look at down here at the bottom, children 2 to 5. So you see in the Latino population about 17% versus 3.5% in the Caucasian. If you go to the 6 to 11, you see it increasing. You go to the 2 to 19 where you've got more of the adolescents in there, and there you're up to almost 40%. You go to the adults, it's 77%. So it tells you it starts early and it progresses. So intervening early, before 5, is really important. And this shows us you children 2 to 19 by race and ethnicity. So you see that the African Americans and Latinos highest. And that's where we see the most obesity in our population, except for I don't have Native Americans up there. So again, paying attention to your ethnic groups and their at-risk population. Here's another one that looks at Hispanics, non-Hispanic blacks, and non-Hispanic whites over a period of about 13 years. And you see that it was high to begin with, and it continues to go up, with the Hispanic population being those at most risk. And then if you look at this one by prevalence, by race and ethnicity, obesity prevalence is the dark purple, light purple is the diabetes prevalence. So you see American Indians very high. About 50% of that population, most tribes have diabetes or prediabetes. So keep that in mind. Let's see. So when do women gain weight? Well, it starts with most women at puberty. Weight goes up. Pregnancy, not shedding pregnancy pounds. And then premenopausal and postmenopausal. From the premenopausal to postmenopausal period is about a 12-year period transition. It is estimated that women gain about 1 pound extra per year. So at the end, women usually have gained about, on average, 12 pounds. Now, why would that be? Normally, why would the body be doing that?
Needed it for growth? To sustain the fact that you're growing?
In an adult?
Oh, I thought you meant why in puberty.
Oh, sorry. So premenopausal to postmenopausal. Okay. 12 pounds. If I said puberty, I meant menopausal period. So where's the major estrogen before menopause? Major estrogen production comes from what organ? Oh, come on. Ovaries. And it's what? What do the ovaries produce? Estradiol. After your ovaries quit working or producing, where's the major estrogen? Why do we keep looking like women? Yes, and it's fat. So, and what does fat produce? What hormone? Estrone. Estrone is the major estrogen. Okay. So it's thought that fat content buildup is to produce or to be a good source of estrogen production after menopause. When do men gain weight? Well, their big transition is leaving usually high school or college and going out into the work world. That's for a lot of people. Getting into the 20s, becoming more sedentary. Some is when they get married. So they quit running around, they quit eating bad food. If they have somebody who's cooking for them, maybe, or they're cooking together, they may gain more. Dr. Britton will tell you that after we got married, he gained weight, but it wasn't like cooking, because I don't cook. So it was his fault. He did it to himself, because he quit running around and be wild. The other is that men's weight continues to gain until they get to the 6th decade, and then with men it tends to fall off over time after the age of 65. Okay. All right, lifestyle. So physical activity, we've talked about that. Sedentary life, promotes weight gain. And you talk about TV watching, but look at some of this information I found. Get out of here. So this looks at from 1990 to 2009, so a 10-year period, looks at TV, music, computer, video, print, and movies. So you can see TV went up from 3.47 hours to 4.29 hours. This is 8 to 18-year-olds. Music greatly increased at an hour and 48 to 2 hours and 31 minutes. Computer went from half an hour to an hour and a half. Video games from half an hour to over an hour. Print media went down. Movies went up slightly. Okay? So you can't always just look at TV. Oh, I thought this was hilarious. As our TV shrunk, we got bigger. Okay, look at adults. So this is 18 to 34-year-olds, 35 to 49-year-olds, and 50-year-olds. The red is the TV watching. So adults over 50, almost 50 hours a week of TV. But look at the other things. So with 18 to 34-year-olds, it's not the TV so much that gets them. It is radio, must be commuting. I don't know, do y'all listen to the radio outside of the car? Yeah, I didn't think so. This is TV connected devices. The blue is your computer, but look where their smartphone starts to show up. So in these age groups, 18 to 49, but over 50, not so much. And then a tablet, you see increases also. So it isn't just TV, we've got everything on our smartphone. Can't you do everything? Can't you watch your TV and your movies and your games and your music? Okay. So it's not just the TV. So asking about keeping that in mind, that other media type of resources is also drawing people's attention. Sleep deprivation, you know about that. So it's reported that about a third of adults do not get enough sleep. So here is 7 hours of sleep, about 30%, 8 hours of sleep, about 30%. It's thought that over 8, not 8, but 9 and plus is actually detrimental as well. And then you've got the 6 hour, 23%, and less than 5 hours, 12%. So how does sleep deprivation add into it? Sophia's not here. But you get increases in hormones, particularly ghrelin and leptin are being looked at. Ghrelin is predominant prior to eating, and leptin is after eating. So leptin is produced by your adipose tissue, and it sends messages and is part of your development of satiety. So letting the body know. So when you are not sleeping well, these get out of whack. Ghrelin goes up, leptin goes down, so your drive to eat more is there. So there's a hormonal basis for it. Smoking. I told you that when I dealt with women who were had quit smoking, the recidivism rate was highest in women. If they gained weight, they'd go right back to it. Well, here I found these. I'd forgotten about Virginia Slims. I didn't know about the Lucky. But Lucky, the first one says, this is you in 5 years from now if you don't smoke. Now, these are back in the 30s and 40s. The one in the middle, to keep a slender figure, no one can deny, Lucky cigarettes. Virginia Slims, wonder how much marketing person made. Virginia Slims, look at the woman. It was a small, slim, slender, tapered cigarette. So Virginia Slims are slimmer than the fat cigarettes that men smoke. But the subliminal is you're skinnier and you look good. So this is probably prior to you all being born. So in 1971, they took cigarette smoking out of you couldn't put it on radio and you couldn't advertise on TV. Virginia Slims was the last smoking commercial on January 1st, 1971. Because Nixon signed a bill that you could no longer advertise on the airways that started January 2nd, 1971. Okay. Over time, in the last 15 years, they have stopped advertising in magazines. Have you seen a cigarette commercial?
Actually,
They're in magazines.
It's rare though, it's rare.
Maybe
Most of them
spirit.
pulled them. You could not do it, there is a law that says you cannot do it in predominantly teen publications. And you have to put all the big print about all the health, but it's low. Compared to the 70s, you don't hear the smoking commercial jingles anymore, like I'd rather switch than fight, Territon, I'd walk a mile for a camel. I mean, those, everybody knew those because they were everywhere. You can no longer advertise cigarettes on clothing. So you can't promote that. You can't promote smoking, or cigarette manufacturers can't promote music gatherings or concerts or sporting events. So it's been way tamped down. I mean, it's almost like invisible compared to what it was when in the 60s and 70s. Okay, so average weight gain. People that smoke, if you look at this, this was in the British Medical Journal. They followed a ton of people who had quit smoking. And you see that over time, usually about 20 pounds is about an average weight gain. So this was the first month they had gained 5 pounds, or 5 kilos. So 5 kilos is how many pounds? About 10 in a month. And then in this second month, you had people that were coming up into the 20-pound weight gain. Third month, you see that group continues to show up, and then you see this group up here where it's more than 20 pounds. And then by the first year, you have got people who are in that 25 to 30 pound range. So that has an impact on packing on pounds when people stop. Diet-wise, so a lot of obesity is attributed to refined fats, carbohydrates, potato chips, processed foods, size of foods, fast service, portion size, decline in physical activity, all of these you know. Dietary habits that cause weight gain are those processed foods, empty calories. The other is a decrease in vegetables, whole grains, fruits, nuts, yogurt. They're not as nutrient dense. Or they're more nutrient dense, so people don't feel as full when they don't eat them. Weight gain, increased consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. It's like booming. When I was growing up, nobody got sodas. It was so unusual for us to have a soda. It was like a treat. We just didn't drink them. So that was as a kid. And then genetic makeup of some people is going to contribute to that. Eating patterns. So most people that are very obese have lost their they call it disinhibition, their ability to regulate their food intake. Frequency of eating doesn't really tend to have a lot of play or impact on obesity. You see the 5 meals a day some people promote. I only find that works if people will calorie restrict to those 5 a day. So if you eat a full 5 meals, it doesn't work. If you take all your caloric intake for the day and divide it up into 5, then that makes sense. Nutrisystem takes advantage of those. It has 3 meals a day, and it builds in and recommends that you eat 2 snacks so that you don't get hungry in between meals. It tends to be more things like vegetables and low calorie, but they insist on that 2 snacks a day in between meals. Eating breakfast is associated with lower risk of overweight. Too bad Sophia's not here. Night eating syndrome. If you consume at least 25 to 50% of your calories at bedtime, that also seems to increase the associated with weight gain. And then binge eating disorder. I saw this a lot in the diabetes population. It was always associated with psychiatric illnesses. I had patients that would buy 2 or 3 cakes and go home and eat them all. Or they would buy several packages of cookies and go home and eat them all. So, comments on those? Any other stories? Okay, you know I would be interested in the drugs. So drugs can induce weight gain. There aren't that many, but there are some that are notable. I always think second generation antipsychotics, always think those, they tend to put on a lot of weight. I know this says 4 kilos, but I have seen 50 and 60-pound weight gains in people on antipsychotics. So the first generation are not as bad as the second generation. So anytime you are going to put somebody on that, if you'll think back to psych, one of the things they've talked about is now psychiatric institutions have to follow metabolic monitoring. So they have to weigh the person, they have to check their blood sugar, they have to check their blood pressure, and they have to send that to the government if they want to get reimbursed. So think that when you are, if you are seeing people that are on those agents, or you're having to start them yourselves. Lithium, antidepressants, very common. Some of the anti-epileptic drugs, valproate and gabapentin. So if you see a psych drug, I would assume weight gain unless I knew the drug specifically didn't. And there are some of the antidepressants that actually cause weight loss, like Prozac. But most of them are weight gain. The diabetes drugs will all cause weight gain. I take issue with their thing here. They're mostly gaining weight because they couldn't hang on to calories before you put them on the drug. Now they can hang on to calories. And then if they continue to have low blood sugars, then they may eat to match those. So it's a little bit different than the metabolic changes that those psychiatric drugs. They are interfering with satiety, processing, inhibition in the brain. These are making you hang on to calories. If you use more of the drug, you'll hang on to more calories. If you overeat and match it with your insulin, you'll gain weight just because you now become like the person that produces insulin. And then cyproheptadine, it's one of the antihistamines we use in more psychiatric conditions. Beta blockers to a small extent, glucocorticoids to a great extent if you're on them long term. I have a couple of graphs. This one's a nice one to look at from the standpoint of weight gain. It shows you all the antipsychotics. Clozaril or clozapine is one of the most, causes the greatest. Zyprexa is one to keep in mind because it is also a great weight producer, tends to also produce a lot of diabetes. Then if you come down to Seroquel, it's also a very common one, also causes diabetes, risperidol, and those are kind of the big ones. I'm surprised Abilify is there because I've seen big weight gain with Abilify and Geodon. So all of them can cause that. There are neuroendocrine obesities. Did you talk about Prader-Willi? Remember Prader-Willi? Those kids tend to be short stature, they tend to be obese, they tend to have lots of eating disorders. They also have diabetes, is common with Prader-Willi. Cushing syndrome, you remember? What's Cushing's? What causes Cushing syndrome? Yes, so they tend to have large truncal obesity, small limbs, common diabetes. Hypothyroidism that hasn't been corrected can also lead to weight gain, which could could be significant. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, did you all talk about that? Mm-hmm. Okay, so what is the main problem in PCOS? High circulating androgens, what do they tend to body size wise look like? They have central obesity, so they usually have very large waist circumference. And then growth hormone deficiency. So all of these can then be causes. So if you can correct the underlying cause, you can help control the obesity. SAD or seasonal affective disorder, we don't tend to have it so much here. North, people in the north tend to have it a little bit more often or have it diagnosed more often. So a depression that occurs during the winter seasons can also contribute. Obesity is more prevalent in lower socioeconomic groups. The reason for that is multiple. Could be education, can be their cultural orientation, can be the food environment, what's available. I'm hoping some of that will come out tomorrow, depending on where you can get food that can influence your caloric intake. The environment, do you have sidewalks? Do you have a place you can go and walk safely? When I would drive to work to OU, to the Health Science Center every morning, I would see the people walking, the African-American women walking usually in groups. They always had sticks with them for protection, and they had to walk in the street a lot because there weren't sidewalks. So asking your patients, I always ask them, do you have a safe place that you can walk or exercise? Ethnicity influences obesity. Black men tend to be leaner than their white men counterparts. African American women of all ages are more obese than white women. Prevalence of obesity in Hispanic men and women is higher than in other ethnic groups. And the onset in adulthood is faster in African American and Hispanic women. So there have been infectious agents that have been linked to obesity, the adeno-36. I don't know what you do about that. The other is this gut microbiota is very much in the news. I told you that a couple of days ago. And people are looking at the effect of diet on the gut and its link to obesity. It's thought that if you don't eat whole grains, if you don't have vegetables and you don't have fruit, then you get more gut inflammation that leads to leakier guts, more inflammatory markers move out into the systemic circulation and add to disease, like diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Questions? This just gives you a list of the diabetes medicines. Those in red are considered the most significant for weight gain. If you go back and look at that. Do you need a break, or do you want to keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. All right, we'll go for a little bit longer then. Screening for obesity. So in all patients should be screened. So the basic way you're going to screen is what? Okay, how are you going to get the BMI?
Height and weight.
You're going to height and weight. So kids, you always do that. Adults, you'll do the same. So the obesity, they are at greater risk, again, diabetes, hypertension, lipid disorders, heart disease, sleep apnea, especially if they have big central obesity, cancer, and in all-cause mortality. So barriers to screening for obesity, Taylor mentioned, it's the stigma associated with the diagnosis of obesity. But identifying the patients then can get them into help, at least to raise awareness. If they can be sent to a dietitian, that would be great. Peggy Turner alluded to the fact that dietitians are able to, they can be provider ones. So provider ones can bill for almost anything. But dietitians are limited in what they can bill for. So they cannot, you can't send somebody to them for obesity and then pay, they would have to pay out of pocket. So that's where they're relying on you to give the information. The people who get reimbursed for obesity is you, okay, for education. So tomorrow we're going to talk about resources. You really need to know your community resources and where to send people. We'll talk about things like Weight Watchers and TOPS. In different places, people can exercise for free and different support systems within a community that can help with weight. So we talked about screening for height, weight, BMI. You all have done that in your, with your assignment. For kids, there is a separate chart for children on this side. And then you take that BMI and you chart it on their growth chart. You've seen these, right? Y'all haven't had peds. Have you seen growth charts? Have they been introduced? Okay. So age and then BMI, and then you would plot them based on what percentage they fell in. So this would be below the, this is the 95th percentile. This is the 90th percentile. This is the 85th percentile, and this is the 50th percentile here. Okay. This would be an obese range, this would be an underweight range. Well, I take it back. Why is that green is considered normal weight?
Our pediatrician always said he doesn't worry about it unless they drop below 5th percentile.
Be below the 5th, okay.
Or Casey can say.
Well, the other things they don't worry about is, or they don't worry as long as you stay on your growth curve, unless you're getting into the obese range. So if you look for, under the BMIs, those are all ones that we've introduced you to. I do want you to know those class 1, class 2, class 3 obesity. So they break it down. We'll see this come up again when we talk about bariatric, care of the bariatric patient. So 30 to right under 35 is class 1 obesity, 35 to right under 40, class 2, and over 40. 40 and over is class 3. I'll come back to this in a minute. Measuring waist circumference can also help you with the amount of like visceral fat. So people can weigh the same but have very different body shapes. Yes. So pears tend to have lower, their fat tends to be highest is below the waist. Apples tend to be that central adiposity, and theirs is above the waist for the most part. So this shows you the correct place to measure it. And then there are risk assessments based on that. So if you look at, for men, it's a waist of 40 or greater. For women, it's 35 or greater. They do have them for Asians as well, so I just want you to be aware of that. So when you've got somebody who is in the overweight category, so if someone has a BMI of 30, 25 or greater, then do a waist circumference. Particularly if you suspect metabolic syndrome, they have hypertension, diabetes, elevated lipids, then do this as well because it will kind of finalize your diagnosis. If you are working up an obese patient, here's the list of things to look for or to get. So height, weight, your BMI, waist circumference, their blood pressure you would already take, but also looking at their lipids. Now, very heavy people can have very normal cholesterol, so weight is not always a predictor of elevated triglycerides. But if they are elevated weight, BMIs are elevated, their waist circumference is elevated, and their HDL is low, that's metabolic syndrome. They're at high risk for a cardiovascular event. Fasting blood sugar tends to go along with that, so suspecting diabetes or prediabetes. Sleep apnea, so there's the Berlin questionnaire. Have you been introduced to that? It is one you can give to people if you suspect of sleep apnea secondary to obesity, central obesity. Central adiposity instead of central in the brain. Two different types of apnea. So you can use the Berlin questionnaire. If their spouse has come with them, you can ask, or their partner, you can ask them about their snoring pattern or the breathing pattern at night. Any medications that they're on that increase body weight, which are what? What would you be looking for?
Steroids.
Steroids, antipsychotics, the antidepressants, and the other would be diabetes. Okay. Do they have regular exercise? Are there any other etiologic factors that could be the cause? Like what? What else did we say was associated with increased obesity? Stopping smoking, okay, what else? That you can measure, okay, sedentary, that would go with their physical activity. So TSH, Okay, so, all right. Additional tests would be PCOS. What would make you be suspicious that a young woman who's come in who has all those characteristics, what would clue you off to her having, you thinking she might have, or working her up for PCOS?
Acne?
Facial hair, acne, what else? Amenorrhea. A lot of times those women will first show up as that I can't get pregnant. Okay, but what if they're a teenager? They're not worried about getting pregnant. Pardon? Acne, but what would be other telltale?
Weight gain pretty quickly.
Weight gain, it's going to be their menstrual cycles. Irregular menstrual cycles almost always associated with that. History in the mom. Mom had PCOS. Mother had trouble getting pregnant. Sometimes they won't be diagnosed, but my mother had trouble, or took a long time to get first pregnancy or other pregnancies. Reason for a referral, type 2, sleep apnea, pseudotumor cerebri, we see in kids, start showing up at about 10 or 11. Fatty liver, you've seen this, several of you have seen it in the a Good Shepherd. Those people are almost always obese when they have fatty liver disease. Obese, specialist, a mental health specialist, if their obesity is very much tied to abnormal eating patterns or abnormal obsession over foods, it would be important, or someone who specializes in eating disorders. Bulimics can be obese, so don't necessarily rule that out in people who are having really extreme eating disorders. Okay, evaluation in kids. So all kids 2 years of and older should be, you should use this, you can use this chart. So it's weight across and height in inches. So 2 years and older do a BMI, and then you plot their BMI on their growth curve. Okay. So a normal weight, I want you to know these three. A normal weight is a BMI between the 5th and less than the 85th percentile for age and sex. Overweight is 85% to less than 95th percentile. And then obese is the 95th percentile and greater. You'll see these same breakdowns when it comes to blood pressure and other things that they measure for kids. So normal weight, overweight, obese. You have those in your brain, what those are. Severe obesity is a BMI of greater than 120%. When you look at diabetes and the recommendations of who do you screen in children, it goes to these percentiles. So they'll helpful to you if you'll have in your mind of those categories. So investigate the cause. What's their lifestyle? Is their eating pattern off? Is there something big that has happened? What are there stressors that have brought about? Have they had multiple pregnancies very close together? What are their previous attempts? Do they diet? Have they tried a diet? Have they been told to diet and they don't? They recently stopped smoking. Medications they're on. Suspicion of secondary causes that we've gone over. Questions about those? I was thinking on the way in that it is, when I listened to you on Tuesday talk about the stresses that or the change that you've experienced with coming into school and your ability to eat healthy and exercise and sleep right. So most of you have pinned it on the changes that this program has brought about. So I was thinking you're very fortunate that you have gone through that if you've never experienced that in any other part of your life, and you may have other experiences like this. But it will help you when you get out, because your patients or your adult patients are going to tell you the very same thing. I can't exercise, I've got too much going on. I can't lose weight. I'm working, I have children, I can't focus on it. There's stresses in my life. So anytime people are going through those major change, it's very hard to get back to what used to bring health. I was very healthy until I had Cameron. And then it took me about 2 years to get back to something normal in terms of exercise and diet. When I moved from OU to this job, I sit at this job so much more than I did at OU. It's brought me more skeletal problems, it's made it harder to keep weight off, it's making it harder to exercise because the first year I was writing handouts like crazy. This year was better, I'm hoping that next year is a whole lot better, but I am nowhere near what I was 2 years ago. So all those stressors, when you get into your sandwich time, you'll have young children, you'll have parents that are getting older and may get sicker. My mother started declining in health when Cameron was about 7 years old. She came to our house for Thanksgiving. She had a PE in our house. I kept her for the next 6 months, getting her back to health. At the time this happened, Mark was out of town. She had come to stay with Cameron so I could go to a national meeting. I had 2 major presentations to give. And Cameron went into the emergency room. It was like, ah! So those things will happen to you, and they're happening to your patients. So some is to reflect on this time. It's a good learning because you can draw from it. You understand. You can be empathetic. So think about how can you bring health into this? What do you do? I always thought it was good that I'd struggled with my weight all my life when I was dealing with people with diabetes because I could empathize with them, but I also knew ways that you could get out of it. I had been on about every diet known to man, not the fad diets, but Weight Watchers I knew, so I learned a lot from that, and so it helped me a lot. So those life events you have will help you to be more empathetic. Your older adults will appreciate it because they're going to look at you and think you are young and you don't know anything. If they don't like what you're saying, they'll dismiss you on youth. But if you can relate to them in some way, it'll go a long way, go a long way. When I was in the VA, a lot of them smoked. It was my job to tell them, you need to stop smoking. They were like, what do you know, girlie? Have you ever smoked? That was their first thing. Have you ever smoked? No, but both of my parents smoked. So I did understand the struggle in people quitting. So all of those things will help, even though they're very painful to go through. Okay, so management. So we're going to talk about lifestyle and then also drug therapy. Do you want a break now? Yes? Let's take a break. 10 minutes.